Oh, that's a typo. That's fun. Both two. Two strokes.
Welcome everybody to our Physics and Astronomy lecture series event for February. Glad that everybody could make it on an interesting time to have one of these. I know we usually have them in the evenings, but for various circumstances, it became easier to do this one in the afternoon. We do try to have one of these every month, and we will have one for March as well. We're still working on some of the ones for spring term. We will get more information out about those as we go forward. Before we start with today's lecture, I do want to give a little bit of an update on how our physics and engineering department has been working as far as students go. Students are working on, so that you are aware that we have not only academically excelling students, but we have students that are working on tremendous projects. And our PRISMS project coordinator, Crystal Hopper, do you want to talk about our PRISMS work right quick?
Hi, everybody. I am Crystal Hopper, and I am our PRISMS project coordinator here at SWOCC. It is it's actually an amazing program that was funded by and made possible by the space grant. So thank you for that. Part of it is working with our student researchers on the various projects they're working on, the group of amazing students. And they also help me with another really important piece, is our K-12 STEM outreach, which has become a really popular thing around this area, which is great to see. I've reached out to all of the local STEM educators from kindergarten all the way up to high school, and we've had across the entire Coos County and actually into some in Curry County and up into Reedsport, because that is kind of where SWOCC area of coverage is. And we've had a lot of classes we've been able to go and actually visit and do activities together. Send them links of things. Sometimes the kids actually get to come out. But again, like with our student researchers, our spirit team, they can actually, a lot of them will go with us each time, and the kids really like to be, it's kind of nice to kind of have the student researchers with us, with Dr. Claire and I, because I feel like the kids can connect a little bit better. And they'll here in a couple of years if they can be there. And, but they do a great job with that. But again, thank you for being here, and I'm excited about tonight's presentation. And here's Dr. Quinn.
Crystal mentioned most of the work that we do at SWOCC department wouldn't be possible without our connection to the Oregon NASA Space Grant, and then in addition to that, the National Space Grant project. And that was actually how we came in contact with our current guest, with our guest speaker for today, Tomas Gonzalez-Torres, who is the project manager of National Space Grant. Also in his past has been a flight director at NASA Johnson Space Flight Center. And I asked Tomas to speak about some of the lessons that he learned on his path from a STEM student through his work as a flight director, and then what he does now currently, to give us kind of an idea for both students, faculty, and community members, how the STEM adventure can take a number of different routes to get through things. And appreciate, Tomas, you having the time to speak to us today. And I will turn things over to you and have a question and answer after your talk is over.
All right, that sounds great. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear. We can hear.
All right, well, perfect. Well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoy doing these talks. Let me see. Am I still sharing? I don't see. Am I sharing right now?
We can't actually see this. We can see your screen and see you in the corner, so we can see everything.
Okay. All right. Right now I'm seeing you. Do you see my mouse actually? Okay. All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. I do enjoy doing these talks and trying to hopefully pass along some insight from my experiences, especially to those upcoming students and future employees in their lives and careers. So I'll start by giving a little background about myself. I like to start with this photo. Usually, I actually have seen this photo at the Houston airport. But this was one of the missions that I worked. It was STS-121, and you can always tell by the patch here is STS-121. You can see the other crew member here. This was the second return to flight mission after the Columbia accident. The crew member who is in the main crew member in the picture is Pierce Sellers, that passed away now. In 2016 or 17 from cancer. Wonderful man, was from England, and became a U.S. citizen, became an astronaut. Wonderful, worked at the Goddard Space Flight Center as well, doing a lot of climate research. And then in the payload bay, you can see the other crew member, Mike Fossum, and we were performing some science related to repair of the space shuttle in case that was necessary after the Columbia accident. So let me get started here. So a little background about myself. So I was born in Puerto Rico many years ago now. I won't tell you what year. And then I moved to the U.S. I grew up in a small town, Knoxville, Iowa. And I went to Iowa State University and did aerospace engineering there. While I was at Iowa State, ever since I was very young, I always wanted to work at NASA. During my time there at Iowa State, I wanted, again, to continue to work at NASA. I learned about their internship programs, and I applied. And after a few times being rejected, I was eventually selected as an intern. The one thing that I would tell every student is if you have an opportunity to do an internship, then by all means do that. It will delay your graduation a semester, a year. Of course, it depends on how often you do an internship. It doesn't matter, right? This is a semester or a year of the rest of your life. You get some incredible experiences. And here's some websites to apply. If you have an internship and you love it, it was everything you dreamed of, fantastic. That's great. You got some real world experience. The individuals that might hire you, they also got to know you, right? And so they will most likely hire you over somebody they've never met because they know that you can do a good job. If you had an internship and you hated it, great. Now you know what you don't want to do. Right, because you could have this vision and this thought of what it's going to be, how great it's going to be working for whatever company it is, and you spent 4 or 5 years of your life getting your degree, going to work for them, and all of a sudden, 3 months into it, 5 months, a year into it, you're like, wow, this is horrible. I had no idea it was like this here. But that's where you are now. And so every experience that you have helps guide you towards your future. And so my internships, I loved them. I did various internships within the Johnson Space Center. The first one, I didn't like that group. The second one, I thought it was okay. But when I ended up in the EVA group, and I'll talk more about EVA here in a second, but I fell in love. That's where I wanted to be. That's where I kept doing my internships. That's where I was hired, and I worked for many years. So again, I knew that I wanted to work at the Johnson Space Center, and was able to focus my future by my internships. So EVA, extravehicular activities. This is where I did, and it's kind of an anomaly. I did 6 internships, 3 summers and 3 semesters. You don't have to do that many. But again, it was what I wanted, what I loved, and I had the opportunity, so I took it. It delayed my graduation about 1.5 years. Again, I didn't care. By the time I graduated, or even before I graduated, they were making me job offers already, and so it was great. I was then hired into the EVA group. So EVA is extravehicular activities. It's the spacewalks that they do. During my time in the EVA group, I led spacewalks for the assembly of the International Space Station, for repair of the Hubble Space Telescope servicing missions. I worked 2 of those missions. I was a backup for the second to last mission, and I was the lead for the final HST servicing mission. And then also, as I was pointing out earlier, I worked and was the EVA lead for STS-121, which was the second return to flight mission for after the Columbia accident. During my time there, this was a lot of the facility that we used was the NBL, the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. It's a gigantic pool, 200 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 40 feet deep. And underneath, you can see these cranes, these yellow cranes back here are what are used to lift up the crew and put them in the water. We have divers, as you can see, all the dive gear all along here on the side. We have control stations down here. You also have control stations up at the top. The next picture that I'll show you is actually from up here pointed down, and you can see down into the pool. You can start to see this is the truss segment across the space station. And then this is some of the pressurized modules. So going down to the next section, you can see the truss segment here. Some of the pressurized modules. You have the U.S. laboratory. This is a prior configuration of the current state of the space station. But you have Node 2. You have the European module. The Japanese module wasn't there yet. But you can see that some other truss elements along the sides. The reason for that is the pool is very large, but the entire space station wingtip to wingtip, right from solar array tip to solar array tip, is as big as a football field, including the end zones. And so it actually doesn't fit completely in there. So when we do the training for the crew, we have to kind of piece part it together. And then, so in order to get them in, you can see the yellow crane back here. The crew wears a cooling garment underneath, and they put their pants on with the boots attached, and they slide in from underneath. This is the hard upper torso, which is a fiberglass shell. And then the arms are in there attached to that as well. Then they have their gloves, their helmets, and then they dunk them in the water. When they're in the water, they use weights. You can see some straps down here. So these are not the same flight units that would go into space. These are downgraded units. And then they also don't have the oxygen and cooling and communications and power and all of that within the backpack like the real ones do. You can see the umbilicals along here. There's a white umbilical here. You can kind of see the blue umbilical over here. And so that provides all of the cooling, ventilation, and all of that they use. In order to make them, we still have gravity on Earth, right? The reason we use a pool is because we use the buoyancy of the water to try and make the crew neutrally buoyant. And that allows them to then practice all of the things that they will actually do in space in the water. And they do this multiple times to get good at the skills of being a spacewalk crew member. And so in order to make the neutrally buoyant, you have this balloon now, right? You have this trapped air in here. And so in order to get them weighed down and good, then they add weights and foam throughout, and the divers, these are safety divers with them. They make them neutrally buoyant, and then they can move along using the handrails. And you can see those back here, these yellow strips. This is actually the space station airlock module behind them. And so they'll translate around, do their task. They have foot restraints. They have to practice getting in and out. So every step of the way, it's a dance, right? It's a choreography from the beginning to the end. I'm over here. I need to set my tools this far away because I need to be able to reach it to get this tool and hand off that tool. And I have my helper, and I'm giving them something. And so this whole thing is choreographed, and we write very detailed procedures from start to end. The crew trains for everything, and we practice this all the way through. So I did this again for many years. After doing that, I became the manager of the EVA group for 3 years. And then after that, I was selected as a flight director in the class of 2011. Now, the flight director, this is an example we use. It's kind of a cheesy example, but it gets the point across. Hopefully, if you haven't seen the movie Apollo 13, you should go see it with Tom Hanks. And so within that movie, Gene Kranz is played by, now I forgot his name. Anyway, Gene Kranz is the flight director wearing the white vest in mission control, where it says failure is not an option. So Gene Kranz was one of the original flight directors, and that's a picture of him sitting here in the middle. And then this is me over here when I had hair, and over here as well during a handover. So we have 3 shifts in mission control, and there's somebody there 24/7 every single day. And so while this was the off-going flight director, and so we were going through, he was showing me something that had failed, and they had a little module of it. So he could talk me through what it was that had happened as they're dealing with the situation. Same thing over here, right? This individual, he was actually an ADCO, attitude and control officer, and he came over to talk to me about something. But the flight director then is the person in charge of mission control. Ultimate authority for the very number one priority is crew safety, of course. After that is vehicle safety, because vehicle is necessary for the crew. And then after that is then mission success, right? We actually want to get the activities done that we deem necessary. So I was a flight director for about 5 years. And then I moved back to Iowa to be closer to family. During my time at Iowa, or I'm still living in Iowa, initially I was a professor at Iowa State University, where I had been a student teaching a senior design course in aerospace engineering. During that time, I also became the director of the Iowa Space Grant Consortium. And now I'm the project manager, as Aaron mentioned, for all of Space Grant. So the next aspect that I'm going to go through, hopefully there's a lot of students there. This is mostly targeted towards students. But I want to talk about some of the experiences that I had in mission control, and specifically how those can help impact and lessons learned from that. They can hopefully guide you towards performing activities and how you respond to things in the future. So this is really, fatherly love or guidance to pass along. So the first thing is leader and leadership. Many people believe that they're always looking up to the person in charge, right? They're the leader. And in reality, you don't have to have the title to be a leader. In reality, there are many individuals that don't have the boss title, right, or the leader position, that are seen as leaders because they are natural leaders, from the way that they communicate to others, the thoughts, the experiences, things like that. How they do those things are very much critical, and therefore others see those skills and look up to them. So you don't have to be a leader in name in order to provide leadership. When I even as a leader, as a flight director, as a manager, there were individuals that I saw as leaders within the group, and I always sought them out to give me advice, right? As somebody to ping ideas off of and bounce ideas off of, and they were always great. Because again, their leadership experience helped me then also become a better leader. And there are times that folks are promoted right into leadership positions because their thoughts like, oh, you're great at this level, so you're going to be great at the next level up. That's not always the case. You need to make sure that it just doesn't come naturally, right? You have to work at it, read books about leadership, take leadership classes, and develop yourself as a leader in order to be good at those next levels as well. Lead from the front when necessary, but then from the back when also possible. The example here is that flight directors, right, they're in charge of mission control. As an example for ascent and entry, right, critical aspect and critical time of vehicle launches, and also during EVAs and spacewalks. Those are critical times within the overall criticality of spaceflight. For ascent and entry, right, the most critical time might be just a few minutes, right? Ascent from the time they launch to the time that they have main engine cutoff is usually about 8.5, 9 minutes. And so the whole team needs to be, you're right, clicking and going. Early on, as the team is developing, the flight director will provide a lot of guidance, making sure that the expectations are set, that folks are communicating with each other well. As that team continues to do more simulations and preparations for the actual launch, the flight director speaks less and less because everybody knows their role. And by the time that they launch, right, many times the flight director has very limited things to say. The teams know what type of data they need to be reviewing, what they need to be providing everybody on the communications loops, right? And anything that the flight director would say at that point is actually going to detract from the great communication of the team, right? So why would a flight director, or why would I say anything if the team is firing on all cylinders and they're going and going? Then I'm just going to sit back, monitor things. If I need to step in, then so be it. But in general, if the team is doing what they need to, right, at most, I might just say, okay, copy, right? And that's it. I heard the information you told me. I acknowledge that, and let's move forward, right? I don't need to repeat it. If I do that, I'm just hearing myself talk, and I'm taking over the airwaves, and I'm blocking communication with somebody else. You just keep things focused. And again, leading from the back when possible. Leaders take care of their people. And this can be done in many different ways, but even in just some of the simplest ways. During one of my missions as a flight director, something failed, and I needed people to come in over the weekend. Right, this was Friday afternoon that this item failed. Emails went out. Everybody's aware that we're going to have to come in on Saturday and Sunday to work on this. I had a fantastic team. They're amazing. They're coming out of the woodworks. Hey, you need me to come in? I'll come in on Saturday or Sunday, whatever. It was the put me in coach type of scenario. And the thing I knew was that this failure is a marathon. It's not going to be a sprint, right? So I'm not going to ask 20 people to come in to work on Saturday and Sunday, even though they offered. My response was, I have 3 or 4 people that I need for Saturday. I really appreciate you offering. I'm going to need you on Monday or Tuesday, right? And so I'm going to put you on my reserves, right, ready to go, so that when I have a late meeting on Monday or Tuesday, I can call in on you instead of working 20 people, right? Half of them, they might just be sitting around. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to let you get some rest, spend time with your family this weekend, because I'm going to need some extra time next week, right? Just that simple act of making sure that they're aware that I'm not going to waste their time. I am thinking about their work-life balance. I'm thinking about them. Those are the reasons, right, that they are coming forth and offering to help, because they know that if I take them up on it, or if I ask them to come in, that it's for an important reason, and I actually have work for them to do. It's not that I called 20 people in and it's like, oh, he called us in again, I'm just going to sit around for a few hours not doing anything, right? That's not the way you run things. And so they knew that, and they knew and realized that I would watch out for them and their families as well. A leader is somebody that you look towards in a time of crisis. And this was something that was told to me very early on in my time as a flight director, right? It is imperative that a leader is aware of this. If we have a major failure on the space station, and I am on console, the team is just naturally going to be a little worried, right? And so their level of concern just went from here, even keel. They're seeing all these failures, all the data coming in. They're now worried. If they turn toward me and they see that I'm like, oh my, it's like, okay, so what are we going to do here? They just went not just from here to here, but they just like, oh my goodness, we have no idea how we're going to deal with this failure, right? That's not what you do. Regardless of how the leader might be feeling inside, the leader maintains, right, that level of comfort and calm, because everybody just went from here to here, and they turn and they look at the leader, and the leader's, all right, folks, okay, let's just look at the data, right? Let's see how we can respond to this, asking some questions, right? Very calm. And now everybody's went from here to here and then back down again. It's like, okay, well, we got this, right? And in reality, we do so many simulations that, and I remember everybody has their way of keeping track of failures. And during simulations, right, these were 9-hour simulations. You show up at 7 o'clock. You get your console ready to go. You start with pre-briefs. Everything's going around 7:30 or 8, right? And then you go until 3 or 4 o'clock. Then you do your debriefs and things like that. By the time that the day was done, I had 6 sheets. Each one had 4 or 5 complex failures on them. I'm trying to keep track of all day long. Having 1 or 2 failures in real life, that was nothing. Right, because they train you and they prepare you for this these incredible situations with all of these emergencies and rapid depressurizations and fires on the space stations and medical situations and all these things. And so when you have a single or 2 failures, it's like, we got this, right? It's not a big deal. And so it's not that difficult to maintain, right, that calm and make sure that the team stays calm as well. But you need to be aware that others will be looking towards you in how to respond in a time of crisis, in a time of failure. Okay. Whenever you get a job, whatever job you get hired for, you are hired for a reason. And so you need to remember not to be timid, right? Speak up. And the reason for that is because you have new experiences and new thoughts and new ideas. At NASA, right, we call them the graybeards, right, the folks that have been around forever since, Apollo or before or whatever, right? And so that's starting to be, one of me, right? I was there when the first space station element launched. And so, we have thoughts and ideas as far as how things have been done, and things that we know work, but there's new technologies, new capabilities, and the youngsters, right? You have a better grip of those new capabilities and potential ways of making things easier, better, faster, that we want you to provide that insight and input, right? We're going to balance each other out, right? Because you're going to say, hey, let's do this. We can get it done so fast. We're like, hold on, right? There's risks that we need to mitigate, but we need to pull at each other and meet somewhere in the middle so we can improve things, so that we can improve things and make things better, all right? So make sure to speak up and not be timid, right? At the same time, remember to know your place, right? Because you are new, and you may not have the final say, and not just because you're new, right? The other person that's been around for 10 or 15 years in your same organization, they might not have the final say either, right? But some much higher up manager is the one with the final say. However, you are an expert in your field, and as a higher up manager, I want your opinion, and I need you to provide me the risks and absolutely provide me a recommendation, right? But provide me all of the options, because if you don't provide me what are the options or a few of the options just because you don't like them, right? And I realize that you've lost some credibility, right? And we'll talk about trust here in a second, but that is very important, right? So if there's 5 options, you lay out 5 of the options, but you tell me the pros and cons of each of those options, right? You don't like options 1, 2, 3, or 4 because of these things. I recommend option 5 for these reasons. Your manager may or may not agree with you, or you've done a good job convincing them, whatever it is, right? There are other reasons that decisions are made, right? And so some of those might be political, right? The International Space Station is truly international. European Space Agency, the Russian Space Agency, the Japanese, the US, the Canadians, right? All those have a play within the International Space Station. So there are politics that need to be balanced in making some of the decisions, right? Funding, absolutely. I don't have the money for this project right now. We'll have to delay that one, or this activity. Schedule, right? Or crew capabilities. I know this crew member that's up there right now is much better at doing these tasks or this science, right? So I want to get that done and accomplished before they head home. This next crew member is really good at doing this maintenance work. So I'm going to swap these priorities, move things around. All of this comes into play when making the decisions. And so while you may make a recommendation, they may not take that recommendation. Do not take it personally. There might be other aspects that are being balanced that you may not be aware of, okay? But I want your recommendation, right? Make sure to provide that to me, but remember your place, okay? Trust, right? As I mentioned, trust is invaluable. The more trust, the more you are trusted, the less you're going to have to convince people in the future, right? If time after time I come to you, right, and you're telling me correct information, or information that's very valuable and helpful, and you're being honest with me, then subsequent times, right, it's going to be, oh, Sally told me this or Joe told me this. You can take it to the bank, right? Absolutely. I have full trust in this person. You don't need to convince me anymore. And in fact, sometimes I'm not going to have time to double check you, right? And so this was true as a flight director on console, right? There were individuals during simulations or during real time that, again, time after time, right? I would ask a question. They would tell me, hey, the answer is 27. Okay, did you think about this item? Yep, and this is why. What about this other thing? Yes, absolutely. We considered this and this. And by the way, we also considered these other things. All right, they know what they're talking about, right? And I do this a few times. It's like, okay, this is somebody that I know they've got their stuff together. They obviously understand, and right, doing that several times. I don't need to dig in as deep every single time, right? Again, Sally or Joe, whomever, right? I trust them. In an emergency, I need a quick answer. They tell me the answer is 27, done. Let's go with that. We know the answer is 27 because I have full trust in them. They have developed that over the years. At the same time, there are individuals that I didn't trust to that same level. And that was because they proved that time after time. They proved that, right, they would say the answer is 27. I said, well, did you consider this? Like, yep, I sure did. What about this other thing? Oh, no, let me take a look at that. I'll come right back to you. It's like, okay, so come right back to me, right? It's like, no, I didn't consider that. The answer is 25. Okay, well, did you consider this other thing? Well, no, I didn't consider it. Hold on, let me get back to you, right? You do this a few times and all of a sudden like, okay, well, I don't trust any number because I'm not sure that they actually did their homework, that they really understand the failure. And so even in an emergency, right, if I don't trust this person, then I still, right, even though I only have, 30 seconds to reply, I need to ask a few questions and dig in a little bit to make sure they have done and proven that we can, in fact, move forward. So trust is invaluable, right? Yeah. You will, in fact, again, from your experiences, learn who you can trust. But what I find more important, I want to make sure to pass along, is how will others see you? Are you going to be that person that is trusted, right? That others will look to you and absolutely they can see, yes, they tell me the answer is 27. You can take that to the bank. They are the individual that I don't need to ask any more questions. In case of emergency, we can just move forward, right? Sally, comes in the meeting's at 5 o'clock. She shows up 5 minutes early because the meeting starts at 5. Right? It's not show up at 5 and start getting everything ready. The meeting starts at 5. That means you show up 5 minutes early. Everything's ready to go. We can start actually having the meeting at 5. Right? She finished her homework. She has her list of questions. We can balance things off. Right? She was supposed to bring the results of her part of the project, and she is doing that. And we never need to double check to make sure her work is done. Joe, on the other hand, right, he shows up 10 minutes late. He's not respectful of each other's time. He was supposed to have the homework done yesterday so that we can compare. That he, every single time it's 2 days late. Right? How are those individuals? How are you going to be seen? Right, one way or the other is how you're going to be seen. That's going to be up to you and how you perform. And obviously one way is better than the other. I was selected in 2011 as a flight director. I applied 3 times as a flight director, was selected the 3rd time. There should be of no surprise that the first time I applied to be a flight director was not the first time that folks were taking a look at me, right? Again, this trust aspect, it plays a big part in it. I worked in mission control as an EVA officer for many years. I was a manager for many years. They saw the type of work that I did, how I interacted with others, how I led teams, that I was very trustworthy. And so there were no questions, right? Well, there were still questions, but that was not the first time that they're all sounds like, oh yeah, Tomas applied to be a flight director. Oh, let's check him out and see. Right? It was everybody had some experience and some thoughts based on prior experiences for me or with me. So people will remember the good, and whether right or wrong, people will remember the bad that you've done, and many times it's easier to remember the bad. And it's harder for people to forget the one bad thing than the 20 good things that you did. So it's again, right or wrong, that's just the reality of life. And in reality, right, you started interviewing for your next position yesterday, right? How you behaved yesterday, the homework that you turned in yesterday, how you responded to an email, were you professional, were you prepared? You started interviewing for your next job yesterday. And so remember that from day one that you go into a new job, a new position, that is how you're going to be seen and how others will remember you. I had lunch with a student years ago, and former student, and they had learned, right, that I had worked at NASA. This is before I was back with NASA again. And they said, man, I always wanted to work at NASA. They were working for a different engineering company. It was good company. But my first question is, well, then why aren't you? Or did you apply? Did they tell you no? Well, no. Why didn't you apply? Right? If this is something that you've always wanted to do, right, have them tell you no. You need to apply, have them tell you no, right? And then try again, have them tell you no again and again. I applied to be a manager 3 times. I got selected on the 3rd time. I applied to be a flight director 3 times. I got selected on the 3rd time. I applied to be an intern. For some reason, number 3 works for me, right? 3 times, and I got selected the 3rd time. Astronauts, I know of astronauts that have applied 10 times, 14 times, right, and then got selected. If it's something you want to do, then you need to go do that, right? Let somebody else tell you no. And this isn't true just with NASA. Whatever company you want to go do, or whatever research you want to go do, whatever university you want to apply to, go do that, right? Have them tell you no, and then apply again, right? Have them tell you no again and again if it's really where you want and have your passion. Okay. That's what I have. I think I have some time for questions, but yeah, I'm available to answer some questions.
All right. Tomas, stop your screen share. We can actually pull up a window that has you, and I can show the audience so that we can do the turn the here. Camera on. That will show you some of the audience. Anybody in the audience that has questions, feel free to stand up and you can ask your question. We should be able to hear it via Zoom. So if you have questions, that would be a great time. If you have questions on Zoom, for those of you that Zoom, if you raise your hand, I will unmute you unless you ask your question as well. Who wants to go first with the first question?
I'll go first. Hello. Howdy, Mr. Tomas. I'm looking at that webcam right there. Hey, thank you for giving your talk today. Really appreciate that. I'm sorry to give such a super generic question. Sure, you get it everywhere you get, but could you run me through the scariest day being the director of mission control right there? I'm curious, what was the scariest day for you, man?
Sure. Well, one of the most personal days, because just working at NASA, this was before I was a flight director, was of course the Columbia accident. Yeah, so that I can go into a lot of personal aspects of that and how that impacted me. But as far as the scariest, so there were 2 times. I actually was not on console, and so the way that missions work is you are assigned as a flight director. You either work on console or you're leading an increment. And so an increment or an expedition is the time that you have a crew go up to the space station. They stay there for an extended period of time and then they come back down. So during that time that they're up there, you are the increment lead. And that's actually why the 42 is behind me. I was the increment 42 lead. And so that during the time that my crew was up there, I actually didn't work in mission control, but I was in the mission control building day in and day out, doing meetings, basically assigning and working with my planning team, working with the Russians and the Japanese, all the Europeans, the space station program, the mission managers, everybody, to determine our priorities for that day, for the next day, for the whole week, and for the 6 months coming up, which was constantly shifting and changing, of course, as things broke and changed and whatever. And so I had, which I loved, like that was such a fun job. But during that period of time, right, all of the aspects and the flight directors that were actually on console would reach out to me. You reach out to the increment lead because you might be missing some aspect of the puzzle, right? Something breaks and you want to shift some items around, but you want to make sure you understand the priorities. And so they would reach out to the increment lead and make sure that they understood things, and then they go and execute basically based on the guidance that I provided. So I wanted to provide that background. So that's the increment lead. So 2 times, a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm at home in bed, and my boss calls the chief of the flight director office, and he says, the crew is okay. And I'm like, uh-oh, where do we go from here? Right. This is one of those mom and dad, I'm okay, it's type of things. And okay, you're okay. So you have to establish that up front, right? And then you explain the situation. And so he started with the crew is safe. I'm like, oh no. And then he says, we've had that they have responded to ammonia in the cabin. And so there are 3 major emergencies. There's fire in the cabin, a rapid depressurization, and a toxic atmosphere. Those are the 3 main emergencies that we train for all of the time. There's lots of other emergencies, but those are the 3 primary things. And in fact, there are emergency buttons on the walls of the different space station modules for those 3 items specifically. So the toxic atmosphere is the ammonia situation. Ammonia is used on the U.S. segment for cooling. It's in the radiators on the outside. And so it actually stays on the outside. We then use heat exchangers on the inside. You have a water cooling loop, and we use cooling plates, right? You have this hot computer. It sits on top of a metal plate. That metal plate is cooled with cold water that's circulating. It picks up the heat through the metal plate, right? And it takes it away. Then we use a heat exchanger that is ammonia, and the water is then cooled and it comes back. The ammonia stays on the outside of the station. It goes to the radiator to expose to deep space. It gets cooled off and the whole thing circulates, right? That's how a heat exchanger works. So the problem is that there is a weaker, not a weak point, but a weaker point, which is at the heat exchanger location between the water and the ammonia. The ammonia is at very high pressure. Water is at a much lower pressure. There is a potential failure where, based on certain criteria, if the ammonia loop at a much higher pressure leaks into the water loop, it's going to take over the entire water loop. The water loop isn't going to be able to handle that pressure. It's going to leak out into the cabin, and now you have ammonia in the cabin. Ammonia is incredibly toxic to humans, right? And this is pure ammonia, right, that we use for cooling. And so the response is basically, as soon as you get the ammonia alarm, you dive into the Russian segment. They actually use a different kind of cooling system. You close the hatch, and then you start investigating whether or not it's a real situation. So the crew was actually isolated in the Russian segment. If this had been real, because obviously we still have the space station, if this had been real, it would have been a loss of the entire U.S. segment. from the Russian segment back would have been isolated. Everything on the U.S. side, the European module, the Japanese module, the Canadian arm, all of that would have been lost. And we have no way to currently at least, from last I was a flight director, to recover from that. So it's a very low probability that it would happen, but we are prepared for that contingency to make sure the crew is safe. And so that was a very crazy time. And I went in, right? My wife is like, is it bad? And I was like, yeah, it could be. Right. And so I went directly into the office. We spent the next day trying to resolve this. It was a sensor failure that we had no idea could respond that way, that tricked us all. But after a full day of looking into this, trying a few things, we eventually discovered that it was a sensor failure. Thank goodness that it was a sensor failure. So anyway, so that's one of them, but I'll stop babbling so others can ask a question too.
Thanks, bud. Other questions from anybody? I'll actually ask one because you talked a little bit about about getting into the internships while you're a student, but I want to ask from kind of from the instructor perspective, looking at student advice. What advice would you give for students in terms of like classwork and preparedness that they should go into if they're looking to follow into careers at NASA, or if there's any particular guidance with that in terms of like field of study or anything else you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So there's obviously a very large focus on STEM right now in the STEM areas. And there's always work at NASA for anybody in a STEM field. You need to find an area that you enjoy and are passionate about, right? This is the same answer that we give people that say, I want to be an astronaut, what should I do? You need to find something that you love and be very good at it. It really should be a technical field. But you need to, right? Everybody that applies at NASA, right? There's 10,000 or so, right, applicants. Of those 10,000, some of them, right, aren't even qualified. But of those 10,000, you have, 2,000 or 1,000 really good applicants. I mean, these are really good people. You need to be able to showcase yourself. And the only way you're going to do that is if you work hard. And the best way to work hard is to really enjoy and love what you're doing. And so, from that aspect is if you want to be an astronaut or if you want to work at NASA, right, there is a wide variety of opportunities at NASA. And in fact, there are non-STEM opportunities as well, right? If you love doing working in the communications area, doing public relations. I mean, NASA has a huge public relations and public opportunities and reaching and things like that, outreach activities, K-12 activities, right? I mean, that space grant has a huge component of that. If you want to be a flight director, if you want to be somebody that works in mission control, right? I was aerospace engineering, but folks in my group, in the EVA group, had all kinds of engineering or other types of science backgrounds. You need to show that you are technically competent person, right? You don't get a degree in training astronauts to do spacewalks, right? They're going to teach you, a lot of information. There's a lot that you're going to learn in real life when you get into that position. But you need to bring some background, with you. You need to show that you have some technical skills, and that in fact, right, you have good grades. You can work with others because you worked in teams and things like that. And so if you showcase those things, that builds your resume very well. If I see a resume and somebody has a 4.0, the first thing I look at is, all right, what else did they do? Right? Did they work in teams? Do they have experiences working with others? Good communication skills? Right? It's fantastic that you have a 4.0, But long gone are the times when individuals will sit in a corner, do all their analysis and say, here's the results, and go back to typing and doing their analysis, right? You work in teams. You need to present your ideas to others. And so do you have those skills? So somebody that has, a 3.5 that has led teams in student projects or in other types of student challenges or things like that, or they were in band, whatnot. I'll take that person over a 4.0 that has no other experiences outside of that.
Very important piece of advice to share, because I know I've had some students that are obsessed with their 4.0 GPA, but they get not as concerned about the experience portion of it. It's good to hear that come from someone other than the instructors around here that will say that. Any other questions from the audience or on Zoom or comments? Anyone? Go ahead.
I think it's no secret that NASA has not always been friendly to people of color and women and so forth. Do you mind talking a little bit about your own experience on a WASP program?
Tomas, could you
talk about? I'm a little bit. Go ahead and repeat it. I caught most of the beginning, but not towards the end.
Someone step up so you're closer to the mic. You can step up to the microphone.
Repeat it for me, please.
Okay, I'll repeat it. She was saying, she was asking that in the past it's been kind of known that NASA had struggled with some of the diversity elements in terms of gender, ethnicity, and various other aspects. And she was asking if you wanted to share any of your experiences with regard to that, given that your heritage and experiences with NASA.
Sure. Yeah, it's. I live in Iowa. I'm from Puerto Rico, and I live, in the Midwest, not an entirely diverse area, of the country. Johnson Space Center is in Houston, Texas. Incredibly diverse area, which I loved about that. And I miss the various cultures, experiences, the cultural festivals and things like that, and the exposure to all of that. My experience at the Johnson Space Center was fantastic. I have still amazing friends as an intern, as a permanent person there, full-time job as a flight director, as a manager. During my entire time, and I even see it more so now as the Space Grant project manager, the large focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, the DEIA work that NASA is doing to try to reach out to diverse populations and diverse, not just individuals as far as their skin color or sexual orientation, but their way of thinking. Right. I mean, somebody, a Puerto Rican that grew up in Iowa is going to think differently than a Puerto Rican that grew up in Puerto Rico. And that's true with every, race and sexuality and everything else. And so very just open to that. Anyway, I had great experiences. I will tell you, but you're absolutely right. Women and people of color, nationwide and NASA-wide and government-wide, not a great history, in the past. Some of the most amazing engineers that I met and that I am still very good friends with are women at NASA. Just amazing. And there's one individual right now. She is the Deputy Space Station Program Manager, right? Still a very good friend of mine. She and I worked together in the EVA group. She became a flight director several years before me, and she is now the deputy for the head of the space station program. That young lady, if she wants to be president someday, she can. I mean, just an amazing person, just naturally skilled and hard worker. And there are many women like that there, and many people of diverse races there as well.
So your advice would be the same as keep applying?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We know that NASA programs are very competitive. Just keep after it until you can get there, if that's a dream you wish to chase. Other questions? Cameron? Yeah. You're kind of off camera, but if you go to the middle, you can.
Camera. Oh, there I am. All right. Hi. So we talked a lot about how really competitive, but also how really valuable these internships are. So I was curious, like, when you got your internship, what kind of application and resume did you have going in? And also the topic of experience, what would you recommend, like, with how competitive all sort of opportunities and experiences right now, what would you recommend, like, something like students like me do to help make things look better?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And right, you need to have good grades, right? And again, I don't want to say, don't go for a 4.0. You can go for a 4.0, absolutely, but make sure that you are capable of balancing your schoolwork with the other skills that you will gain by doing other activities. And it's the same thing, right? Interns, when somebody's looking for an intern, they're looking for a potential future employee, full-time employee. And so they're looking for very similar things as you would be if you're interviewing for a permanent position. So they want somebody with good grades, some experiences, right? So freshmen are a little harder to get in to an internship. So I was selected as at the end of my sophomore year. Summer after my sophomore year was my first internship. And I was in band. I had pretty good grades. I was a member of a couple of different organizations at Iowa State. And so that showed my interest, right? And it showed I was part of the Iowa State Space Society. So that showed interest. I have interest in space, right? I was in the band, so I worked well with others. I, had to, you had responsibilities, right? To learn your positions, to learning your music, things like that. And I had good grades as well. And so if you can showcase these skills that you have, that will help during an interview. If you are a member of an organization, of a rocket team, right, and what you want, and you're part of the structures team, but you want to do propulsion in the future, you should be on the propulsions team, right? Because that's of your interest. Now, the propulsions team might be too big and whatever else, and that's fine. You can still get experiences, right, that you can showcase, but get there eventually, because that's, you're going to try and convince me. It's like, oh, I want to do propulsions, but I've done nothing that I show on my resume that is propulsions work. At the same time, I'll tell you that if you get an internship, right, apply to various places, right, to NASA, to SpaceX, to wherever else, even if it's not a space company, getting real world experience looks good on your resume, and it will make you look better the next time you apply, again, to NASA or SpaceX or Blue Origin or wherever for that internship. And so, again, keep applying, broaden your resume with lots of good experiences.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Tim.
First, thank you for the talk. I found it very insightful and inspiring. You mentioned a lot about being prepared for like the questions that your superiors may ask of you. What advice would you give to someone to prepare for those questions. They're preparing for an interview or a proposal.
You guys froze. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Sam, you want to repeat your question?
I caught it. So what advice can I give in preparations for being able to answer questions to your management superiors? Is that right?
Yeah, like if you're preparing for a proposal or an interview or something, what advice would you give to prepare for the questions they might ask?
Sure. And this was part of the job that, one of the aspects of the job that I loved. It was always the what ifs. And so at NASA, we're always preparing for contingencies. And so you would lay out your timeline, and then you'd go through it, and it's like, okay, well, what if this bolt breaks, and what if this, and what if that, right? And then you prepare for those contingencies. You're not going to think of everything, right? But first of all, you're the expert, right? If you're preparing a proposal, this is your proposal. This is your project. I'm going to ask you questions. Typically, it's again the conversation. It's not a gotcha. I'd see, if they really know their stuff. The conversations that I had with my flight controllers was making sure that I understood. Right, we're having a conversation. Again, it was never a I got them. Right, go back and just go sit down. It was okay. Well, lead me through your train of thought here. Right? Does that make sense to me? If it doesn't make sense to me, then I'm going to ask you a question. Right? If you can answer that, then okay, let's keep having a conversation. Right? Explain this to me. And so, in the same aspect, if you're preparing a presentation or a proposal, go through those what ifs. Right? So step through it. Either have somebody else on the team ask you questions. Bring somebody else in. Right? And practice in front of them. But what if, okay, so we're going through and here's the design. It's like, well, what if the wing breaks? Right. This is a ridiculous question, right? But, but go down that path, right? What if they ask me about this? Well, that's a good point, right? I have a conference here in a few weeks. And so I'm going through my presentation and it's like, oh, well, what if they ask me about this? Right. It's like, oh, well, that's an easy question. I can answer that. Oh, it's a little more complicated. So maybe I want to slide in my backup charts. Right, so I can step them through that. And so you can have, and I would tell my students this, you can have, 10, 20 backup slides. And if you don't have enough time, right, then if you're given 10 minutes to do a presentation, then you need to get everything done in 10 minutes. You can have another 20 minutes of backup slides, right? Because if I ask you a question, well, that's my time. Right, I am giving you my time. At first, I've only given you 10 minutes. You go through the presentation, we're done, fantastic. Now I start asking questions because I'm intrigued. I want to learn more about this. I have now opened the door, right, to giving you more time. And that happens all the time, in presentations. You're presenting, or I'd be presenting the space station program manager about some topic. I get 10 minutes, okay. Then he starts asking questions. Well, okay, this is his time, right? I got not enough, plenty of time, but basically I'm going to give him, right, the time he needs to ask his questions. And so if we're sitting there talking for another 30 minutes, it's been fantastic. I've gotten more detail across to him, more information. And so I would always include backup slides if it's going to be helpful. If they don't ask the questions, then don't go into the backup slides. But go through those what ifs, right? Have somebody come in, somebody that's not on your team or somebody that has less experience, right, to ask those questions from the outside, right? View your project from the outside. If you can explain it to them, then you're ready to go.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So in terms of the NASA was working where it was just the US involved, and so you didn't have a bunch of other cultures, a bunch of other organizations with different objectives, et cetera, politics, all that stuff was in the early stages easier than like on the International Space Station where you had all those other complexities?
Yeah, absolutely. The space shuttle just going up, doing its own thing. You had the complexities of organizations within NASA, right? But those were fewer than preparing for and launching, and then of course executing the International Space Station. Absolutely. Working with the Japanese is very different than working with the Russians, than working with the Europeans, just because of cultures and in all aspects of it, right? So absolutely, it is much more complex. But there's also a lot of benefits, right? Because they have different experiences in different areas, different ways of approaching problems. Again, the diversity of thoughts and knowledge, right? It's the same thing. So worldwide, expanding that worldwide instead of just within NASA. And so, for example, right, the way that the U.S. might solve a problem is they might do 20 levels of analysis to make sure that instead of 5 beams, they can have 4 beams, because that will reduce the weight and the up mass and the volume and things like that, right? And again, these are extreme examples. The Russian example is, I don't need to do analysis. I'm going to put 20 beams on there, and I know it's fine, right? So the reality is we need to come somewhere in the middle, right? We need to do maybe some analysis, or maybe instead of just one run of analysis, right? It's like the Russians would do. Again, they do one run of analysis. Oh, it's fine with 5. Well, let me put 7 on there and it's good. Well, maybe I don't need to do, right, another month's worth of analysis to reduce it from 5 to 4 just to save, a few pounds of up mass, because the cost alone, right, of paying people to do that additional month or 2 of analysis, right, you're trying to make that balance. And so the diversity of cultures and approaches also helps everybody balance and continue to learn and develop.
Another question earlier. Yes, ma'am.
A lot of young people have more than one interest. Say you're interested in space, but you're also interested in oceanography or climate or weather. Are there spaces within NASA where you could pursue both passions together?
Absolutely. NASA, the primary structure of NASA is, apart from the highest management, right, the administrator and the associate administrators, the main layout of NASA is what are called mission directorates. And so the primary missions, there is a science mission directorate. There's a science and technology, so STMD, space technology mission directorate, the science mission directorate. There's ARMD, which is the aeronautics mission directorate. And then there's the human aspect directorate. So there's actually 2 directorates for that now. And so the science mission directorate deals with Earth and planetary science, with climate change, works with NOAA a lot, right? The space technology, right? They do a lot of work with new and advancing technologies. Aeronautics deals with, they have a new, one of their big projects right now is called Quest, which is the X-59, which is a silent shockwave. And so they're trying to expand and have commercial vehicles be able to have new wing designs that will allow you to go supersonic while still flying over residential areas. And so, which is a pretty neat project. And so ARMD, and then of course the big fancy name that everybody always deals with, right, is Artemis, the moon, the space station, and so the Human Exploration Office, Mission Directorate, they have that. But absolutely, NASA has a very wide breadth of science that they are doing. And you're right, that does get lost sometimes, but absolutely have the students look into SMD, STMD, ARMD, again, the aeronautics, different mission directorates. Just look up NASA mission directorates, and you'll learn a lot about what they're doing.
Other questions? Well, thank you very much for your time, Tomas. We greatly appreciate it. We look forward to getting a chance to maybe have you come visit in person one of these days if you get a chance to come out here again. Because I know you were up at OSU in Corvallis this summer, but if you're ever back in the area, we'll see if we can get you down here to the coast to get a chance to look around.
I still have lots of questions.
Actually, we have one more question. Gerald, go ahead.
Okay. So, I'm an international, right? I'm from the Caribbean. Thank you. So something I want to be an aerospace engineer, right? Something I've noticed though is internship-wise, especially for aerospace, they kind of want nationals or Americans versus an international. Like that's a requirement. Is there a way to get over that barrier, or is there like maybe alternative companies that you know of? I don't know. Maybe look into it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There is an obstacle right now for many non-U.S. citizens as far as badging. Right, badging is required to get access to some of the NASA systems for software to get on site and things like that. NASA uses a lot of contractors. And so what I would recommend is, in the vast majority of the individuals that work at NASA are under a contractor. They're not what are called civil service, right? They're not government employees. 3/4 of NASA is contractors. And so I would look into, I don't have a specific company, but I would look into some of the contractors that NASA uses. And I know that there are more potential openings there than there are with trying to become a NASA civil servant or a government employee.
Thank you.
And I know as far as the internships go, I know that they have specifically internships for international students, and I will see if I can look up that information, because I saw that come across the other day, and I think it was in one of your slides, Tomas, as well, that there's like an international student internship. Other questions?
Still there. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you because you're muted, Tomas.
All right. Can you see the screen though?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you again.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, if you go to intern.nasa.gov, right, there's 4 different types of internships, and one of them is for international students.
Oh, okay.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, and thank you again, Tomas, for everything. Thank you all for coming. I do want to mention that we do this monthly. This is one of our activities for the Physics and Engineering Department. We do the Physics and Astronomy lecture series. We also have a recent development that we're getting a portable planetarium for SWOCC. So, but we need to. One of the things we'll also be looking at is different ways to add additional educational programming to that planetarium. So if there is something of interest there, I know you can go to the SWOCC Foundation website at socc.edu/give, and you'll be able to donate to that if you'd like to donate to our planetarium efforts or our programs in general. Thank you guys all for coming. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day, and check out our next lecture series will be March the 9th, and that will be back at our normal time at about 6:30 on March 9th, talking about some of the questions about access in STEM education for various circumstances, be it physical limitations, be it learning difficulties and sort of avenues that people get involved. So appreciate everyone's time and have a good rest of your day.